Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. In today's video, we're going to discuss the darkest moment in Hercules' life, when he murdered his own family, killing his wife and 3 sons. We're going to begin with some key moments from his early life, then transition to 2 distinct versions of his kin-killing madness, and finally wrap up with the final tragedy of his life, one that would see him ascend from the funeral pyre to become the only hero in all of Greek mythology to reach the lofty peak of Olympus and become a god, joining the Greek pantheon and finally bearing the hatchet with Hera, who had done everything in her power thus far to make his life a living hell. Let's get into it. Hercules' birth. Alcmene was the wife of Amphitryon, and by him she became pregnant. But one night, Zeus assumed the likeness of Amphitryon and also took Alcmene to bed, impregnating her a second time. She gave birth to 2 sons, Hercules, the son of Zeus, and Iphicles, the son of Amphitryon. Hera was infuriated. Having become the victim of yet another of her husband's countless infidelities, she usually vented her wrath on the other women Zeus took to bed. But this time, she more or less left the mother alone, instead reserving all her ire for the child. That Heracles meant glory to Hera didn't assuage her anger in the slightest. Hera sends the serpents. She first struck while Hercules was still a suckling, crib-bound baby. She sent 2 serpents to surreptitiously slither into the shared crib in the dead of night and strangle the incarnation of her husband's betrayal. What she didn't anticipate was the degree to which Hercules took after his father rather than his mother. His strength, endurance, and durability were already prodigious, nascent though he was. Both children were startled awake. Iphicles was terror-stricken and retreated, while Hercules shot both of his pudgy hands forward, grabbed each serpent by the throat simultaneously, and throttled them until they both lay dead, little Hercules bubbling with gleeful laughter all the while. Hercules' education and temper. Years later, now an adolescent on the cusp of adulthood, Hercules had received a first-class education. He was trained by masters in an eclectic array of subjects that culminated to mold the ideal Greek man: chariot driving, wrestling, melee weapons of every sort, archery, horseback riding, music, philosophy, you name it. As you can imagine, he more than excelled in anything requiring physical prowess. However, sedentary pursuits that use the mind more than the body were another story. What's more, the instructors of these intellectual subjects put their very lives at risk when they taught Hercules, who was prone to impulsive acts of violence. Such was the case with his music teacher, whom Hercules clubbed over the head with his lute when a fit of anger took him. Though it wasn't his intention to deliver a killing blow, his strength was unmanageable, especially for a young man lacking in virtues like temperance and prudence. While Hercules inadvertently perpetrated many horrible acts over the course of his life, counterintuitively, these served to underscore his strength of character rather than vilify him, for no one was harder on Hercules than Hercules himself, always subjecting himself to whatever was required from him to atone, be it the 12 labors or selling himself into slavery. Hercules and the minions. After he killed the lion of Cithaeron, not a mythical monster, just a really big lion that was causing problems, Hercules crossed paths with a group of minion heralds sent by King Erginus to collect tribute from the Thebans. We are going to gloss over the grievances of years past that soured relations between the minions and the Thebans, but the result was that the Thebans were forced to pay a tribute of 100 cattle to the minions each year for 12 years. Hercules believed this to be an iniquity of the most egregious kind. So he attacked them, subdued them, and mutilated them, lopping off their ears, noses, and hands, then consolidating each set of appendages into their own sack and hanging one of these sacks from the neck of each mutilated man. He sent them on their way hideously disfigured, choosing not to kill them. Hercules then led the Thebans against the minions and routed the enemy army. Reparations were imposed in the form of a retaliatory tribute. The minions were forced to send 200 cattle to the Thebans each year, twice what the Thebans had previously paid. Marriage to Megara. As a reward for his great service, Megara, the eldest daughter of Creon, was given to Hercules. They wed and had 3 sons together. At this point, Hercules was living his best life. A war hero, a man of renown, a beautiful wife by his side, and 3 strong sons to carry on his name, which is exactly why the moment was opportune for Hera to take her second run at him, to rip everything down and replace profound fulfillment with the ashes of devastation. She afflicted his mind with madness, and in this crazed state, he quickly worked to wreak havoc upon the nearly perfect life he had built for himself. He murdered his wife and burned his sons alive. Immediately following these atrocities, his sanity was restored as suddenly as it was snatched away. The scene he returned to was enough to break any person's mind, severing his sanity once more. His family lay dead and their blood was on his hands. Every fiber of his being was now saturated by sorrow. Hercules exiled himself and found his way to the Oracle of Delphi, who told him to travel to Tiryns and enter into the service of his cousin Eurystheus, completing the 10 labors that would be imposed on him, thereby absolving himself of his past transgressions. These 10 labors became 12 because 2 of them weren't counted toward his penance. The second labor, to kill the Lernaean Hydra, was discounted because Iolaus, Hercules' companion, helped by cauterizing the stumps so new heads wouldn't grow back. The 5th labor, to clean the stables of King Augeas, was discounted because Hercules negotiated with the king, rendering the service for 1/10 of the king's cattle, thereby exacting profit instead of earning expiation. Consequently, Hercules was forced to complete 2 additional labors, making for a grand total of 12. The version of events we've been going through comes from the Library of Greek Mythology written by Apollodorus in the 1st century BC. However, there is another much older version given by Euripides, a Greek playwright who wrote a play called Hercules in the 5th century BC. In this version, Hercules had already completed the 12 labors before his bout of madness. During his absence, a man named Lycus seized power, and it was his intention to kill Megara and her children because she was the daughter of Creon, the lawful king. While the lives of his wife and children were in jeopardy, Hercules was in the midst of completing his 12th and final labor, to subdue Cerberus, the great hound that guarded the entrance of the underworld. He was forced to do so without weapons by the decree of Hades, then carry the canine's huge bulk to the land of the living, not just past the gates, but all the way to Eurystheus. Eurystheus was terrified by the sight of Cerberus and promptly ordered Hercules to return him to the domain of the dead. When Hercules finally returned home, it was just in the nick of time, right before his family was about to be executed. He confronted and killed Lycus. But sadly, though he was finally reunited with his family, it was not his lot to happily live out his days with them, neither growing older with his wife, nor watching his sons become men and start families of their own. He was afflicted by madness, and in this state, his mind not his own, he killed his wife and children. It wasn't until he moved to attack Amphitryon that Athena neutralized him by putting him to sleep. Hercules awoke tied to a pillar, the mangled bodies of his dead family strewn about him. Hercules wanted to end his own life after he saw the bloody murder done by his own hands. And not just murder, but the murder of kin, the most egregious kind. Theseus later arrived and convinced Hercules to continue living. Because of what he had done, Hercules wasn't allowed to attend the funeral of his wife and children, let alone remain in Thebes. He took Theseus up on his offer and went with him back to Athens. And this brings us back to an earlier detail hitherto unaddressed in the story. Theseus was trapped in the underworld, where he would have remained forever had Hercules not rescued him during his 12th labor. Unquestionably, Theseus was one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. However, his luster did dim as he aged. The latter part of his life was quite ignoble compared to the immortal feats, the slaying of the Minotaur being the crown jewel, that he accomplished in his younger years. One of his later blunders was helping his friend Pirithous in his endeavor to abduct Persephone from the underworld to make her his bride. They failed and were taken prisoner. Pirithous, as the principal offender, was denied rescue, but Theseus, only the accomplice, was allowed to be taken back by Hercules to the immortal plane. This good deed accrued dividends. Hercules unwittingly cashed in on it later when Theseus arrived, gave him succor, and brought the broken hero back with him to Athens. Returning to what's written in Apollodorus' account, despite falling victim to one of the most evil plots imaginable, Hercules doesn't go out with a whimper. He soars to yet unreached heights in the future, though the pattern of triumph interspersed with tragedy does persist in the closing act of his life. He was married to Deianira, Not long after their wedding, they crossed a river with the help of a centaur named Nessus, who was the ferryman. Nessus insulted Deianira, so Hercules used his bow and shot him with an arrow. While he lay dying, Nessus told Deianira to collect some of his blood to use as a love potion should Hercules ever fall in love with another woman. Much later, Deianira feared Hercules' affection was no longer exclusively hers, so she dressed a robe in Nessus' blood, unwittingly preparing a death trap for her beloved. The blood was the most potent of poisons. When Hercules put the robe on, his whole body was suffused by excruciating pain, as if he'd just been enveloped by the fire of some great conflagration. He tore the robe off and killed the messenger who delivered it to him. Though his body was now marred and had been fled by horrific burns, his strength was hardly diminished. The poison robe would have surely brought swift death to any other mortal, but it presented a different sort of a problem to Hercules. He was too resilient to die, yet his injuries were so grievous that he would never truly recover. He lived in constant pain from the time of the poisoning onwards, every passing second like the wicked cut or cruel stab of a torturous instrument. Death would not deliver him from torment, so he took a proactive approach, resolving to charge toward death head-on. He ordered a pyre built, his body placed on top, and the fire lit. Neither he nor his remains were ever seen again, for he was transported, body and spirit, to Olympus and made a god. He and Hera reconciled. The animosity that had long existed between them finally dissolved when Hercules married Hebe, the goddess of youth and Hera's daughter. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.